All right, so corporate ghoul Nancy Pelosi recently did an interview on MSNBC where she was basically just trying to explain or justify why Democrats really didn't go to the mat to try to aggressively push forward with codifying Roe v. Wade and protecting abortion rights in the wake of the Supreme Court lighting them on fire. So I'm going to play through this interview and then I'm going to give you guys a little bit of my commentary on this, because this is really a perfect example of what I hate so much about the leadership of the Democratic Party and what I hate so much about this sort of like liberal mindset that just nothing can be done in terms of whipping your own party members into line and actually trying to use the power that you have at your disposal to follow through and truly fight for the things that you claim that you are trying to fight for. So let's just go ahead and jump into this clip here.
Let me ask, why did the president wait till now to make this major push for what he says will be a post-election call for a fast track on abortion rights nationwide? Because the House passed it in the fall after Texas, the Senate failed to win the vote in the spring. Why didn't the president really push for that last fall when outrage over the draft opinion showed the handwriting was on the wall?
Well, the president has been a very strong supporter of a woman's right to choose. In your preview, you said, why is he waiting until after the election instead of doing it now? We don't have 60 votes in the Senate. If we could get two more...
You don't think he could have pushed harder on the Senate last
spring? You think we would have gotten 10 Republican votes? You think we would have gotten 10 Republican votes? Oh, come on. You know, let's with all due respect, the fact is we need to get two more Democratic votes to push back this the filibuster and therefore be able, with 51 votes, to enshrine Roe v. Wade into the law. And that will be on the 50th, around the time of the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. When the court
Okay, so there's a lot to say about that. I mean, number one, obviously she was being pretty snarky in her response to a perfectly reasonable and fair question from that reporter. And I mean, her response there is to basically laugh it off and just say, well, we didn't have 60 votes. I mean, what did you expect us to get 10 Republican votes, you fucking idiot? But I mean, at the end of the day, you're also not going to have 10 Republican votes, regardless of whether or not you do pick up a couple of Senate seats in these midterm elections, which it's definitely still up in the air in terms of whether or not you're even going to be able to hold on to the Senate and the House, let alone pick up those seats and keep the House of Representatives to even be able to do the thing that you were describing right now. So the question wasn't even about, could you have gotten 10 Republican votes? Nobody expected you to be able to get 10 Republican votes. It's not what the fucking question was about, right? You know, we just have Republicans in the House of Representatives, overwhelmingly a vast majority of them, voted against codifying the right to contraception and voted against the, the right to gay marriage in this country. Of course they're not going to vote to codify Roe v. Wade. That's been their main issue that they have been running on, or one of their main issues that they have been running on for decades now, and they finally have it in their grips. I mean, we have Republicans in state legislatures all across the country that are passing extreme abortion bans that are wildly unpopular. So the question wasn't, could you get 60 votes in the Senate right now? The question was, why was Joe Biden, why was the Democratic leadership not willing to actually call out the members of your own party that are standing in the way of getting rid of the filibuster or making a carve out in the filibuster to be able to protect abortion rights with your simple majority, which is part of what she was just saying there, right? She almost like contradicted herself. She was like, well, how do you expect us to get 10 Republican votes? And then she immediately turns around and says, all we need is a couple Democratic senators to add to our current coalition to be able to get rid of the filibuster and then codify it with a simple majority, not with 60 votes. So even the situation that she's describing in terms of what their strategy is moving forward is something that was directly contradicting the idea that anybody was expecting her to get 60 Republican or 60 votes within the Senate. That wasn't even what the strategy was. Nobody was proposing that you try to convince 10 Republicans. It was about pushing the members of your own party, actually going and being willing to, after the Supreme Court decided to torch abortion rights in this country, actually using that as an opportunity when everybody was much more fired up about that as the main issue in the country, and actually use that as an opportunity to apply pressure on the people within your own party to be able to pass it with a simple majority with that filibuster adjustment. Okay, so number one, I mean, her response here is not only snarky, but it's also just like not even addressing the actual root of what the question was, right? So that just completely pissed me off because it just feeds into this idea, which is something that Chuck Schumer and something that Nancy Pelosi and something that Joe Biden and basically the entirety of the Democratic leadership class that they have elected right now in these positions of power, all of them have the same mindset that like if there's one crack within their coalition, then it's just done. done. The legislation, whatever it may be, whether it's Build Back Better, whether it's the PRO Act, whether it's any of these other extremely popular pieces of legislation, the $15 minimum wage, right? If somebody in their party just doesn't support it, well, then it's just done. The fight is over. No, that's the beginning of the fight. You have to be willing to go as hard at members of your own party that are basically just Republicans who are effectively, governing as Republicans, but are within your Democratic coalition. Go as hard at them as you would if it was Mitch McConnell. I mean, it's not that difficult. And there's also like an added political benefit there to, even if you weren't able to, at the end of the day, convince Manchin or Sinema or whoever it may be who's standing in the way of getting rid of the filibuster, even if you weren't willing to convince them, even just going out and aggressively fighting and using that as an opportunity to get some sort of political leverage and show people that you are willing to go to the mat, that you are willing to take on whoever is going to stand in your way in order to protect abortion rights, which you consider to be a fundamental right in this country. Even just having the American people see that fight take place would have been an added political benefit for Nancy Pelosi, for the Democratic Party more broadly. So, I mean, it doesn't even make sense, not only from the perspective of like a realistic scenario in protecting abortion rights, it also just doesn't make sense politically. Now, on top of that, I mean, as she was pointing out there, sort of their plan, which she was touching on at the end of this clip as she started to like smile and get all cheery about it, is like, oh, once we win the Senate and we keep the House of Representatives after these midterms, and Joe Biden has come out and said this as well over the last couple of days, the first priority is going to be protecting abortion rights. Well, I mean, this is something that we already heard from people like Barack Obama. I mean, this was something that he ran on in 2008 during that election. He said this was going to be his top legislative priority. So just as a reminder on this, they say in 2007, he promised Planned Parenthood that the first thing I would do as president would be to sign the Freedom of Choice Act, which effectively codifies Roe v. Wade. Now he says the bill is not my highest legislative priority, as he put in a recent news conference. So, I mean, we've heard this shit before, right? People are not going to just continue to fall for this, right? And obviously I'm in favor of codifying Roe v. Wade, but you have to be honest about the current situation. You have to be honest with the fact that, so many, especially young people, saw this guy Barack Obama run for office and promise this big, bold hope and change agenda, including on abortion rights, and then just completely went back on his word. And keep in mind, this wasn't even the same political situation that Democrats are facing right now. This was at a time where Barack Obama had effectively a supermajority control over Congress. So it would have been even significantly easier for Obama to do that at the time. So if this is what happens, with Joe Biden and Barack Obama in the White House just a couple years ago, well, how are people supposed to believe and expect that you are actually going to follow through on it, given that this is an even more difficult political climate to actually get it done? I mean, it's like, they just assume that people should just continuously show up to vote for them, vote blue no matter who, continue to, put their time into supporting this party, while they just refuse to actually demonstrate through their legislative capacity that they are willing to follow through on their biggest and most popular promises. So, I mean, again, you have this history of it. You also have, the fact that Democrats politically have been significantly relying on abortion rights as a major issue going into these midterm elections. And again, it's one thing to promise this. It's one thing to tell people that, if you bail us out in these midterm elections, that, we're going to end up protecting abortion rights. But it's another thing to actually like demonstrate that you have the effective strategies in order to actually get that done. And, based on what we're seeing right now in terms of the polling data here, which we'll get to in a second, and based on some of the sort of like rumors that are coming out of the Democratic Party, I mean, they're already sort of like throwing their hands up and accepting the fact that they are in all likelihood not going to be able to keep a hold on both chambers of Congress. So, I mean, if you look at the polling data right now, according to 538's averages, there's roughly a 60% chance, basically, that Democrats are going to be able to hold on to the Senate, but, that's essentially a coin flip at this point. And then in the House of Representatives, you have damn near an 80% chance that Republicans are going to take it. So if you go back to what she's saying here, her description of events in terms of what the strategy is here to, build this coalition to codify Roe v. Wade on the 50th anniversary of when it was first enacted by the Supreme Court. Well, it's like that situation that you're describing is, according to the statistics right now, incredibly unlikely, if not basically impossible, for them to actually pull this off. And part of this goes back to my commentary that I've been talking about over the last couple of days with, Bernie Sanders' criticism of the current strategy from the Democratic Party going into the midterm elections to pretty much solely focus on abortion and not really talk about economic issues, not really, put forward meaningful proposals in terms of how you're going to address inflation, which are the top two issues going into the midterms. It's inflation, the economy, etc. And basically their political strategy has just just been to solely focus on abortion and hope that this sort of looming threat over the head of millions and millions of people, where they could potentially lose their rights, hope that that's enough to motivate people to show out in the midterms. And if you look at the data, it is not. I mean, it's not going to be enough for them to actually win these elections. I just saw a focus group the other day from Pennsylvania, where it was a bunch of swing voters. You had Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and they were basically asked about, as a part of this focus group, John Fetterman's abortion position, right? And you would think, okay, this is one of the key Senate races. You know, John Fetterman, somebody who has been aggressively saying that he would support eliminating the filibuster to protect abortion rights. That's great. That's fine. And he's been making that a central focus of his campaign so far. But a majority of the people who were in that focus group didn't even know what his abortion position was. So, I mean, you look at the polling data, it shows like, you know, a vast majority of the American people care much more about the economy, care much more about inflation, and you're basically just hanging your hat on the idea that abortion rights are going to be the main issue in the minds of the American people when they go to the ballot box, right? That abortion rights are being stripped away from millions of people in this country. That's going to be enough to enable you to keep on to the Senate and to hold on to the House of Representatives as well. And it's just not going to be an effective political strategy. So, I mean, this is what's pissed me off the most about the Democratic Party under the leadership of Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, is that, you know, it's not even just on abortion rights. It's also every other fight that they've had, right? Again, the $15 minimum wage, where Kirsten Sinema did her cutesy little thumbs down. Where was the pushback on that? I mean, that was one of the sort of like compromises. That was one of the agreements that was made when Bernie Sanders dropped out of the Democratic primary back in 2020, is that Joe Biden promised that he was going to get the $15 minimum wage passed, and he didn't get it done. And he basically let, you know, Kirsten Sinema and a handful of other corporate Democrats completely tank that. And he wasn't going out on the stump. He wasn't using his political capital and the biggest megaphone in the fucking world as the president of the United States to go call out Kirsten Sinema, to call out their corruption within his own party, to aggressively make a push for that. He also didn't do that when it came to Build Back Better, where Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin completely torched that a piece of legislation, and we ended up with the completely watered down and half-assed Inflation Reduction Act written by Joe Manchin, which was completely pathetic relative to what Build Back Better was. There were some good provisions in it, but I mean, it was nothing compared to what Build Back Better, the initial $3.5 trillion version of it, actually was. And so, I mean, you just have this repeat demonstration by Democrats that they are all talk when it comes to all of these major, extremely popular agenda items, and when it comes to actually fighting for it, they're nowhere to be found. I mean, again, the only explanation here is that, you know, they use culture war issues like abortion as, a hanging threat over the American people, hoping that that's going to be enough to bail them out. But then when it comes to like economic issues that are, you know, policies pushed by people like Bernie Sanders that are overwhelmingly popular by vast majority of the American people, they're just not willing to confront the donor class, right? On an issue like abortion, you don't have those same corporate interests that are infiltrating their way through the party and, applying pressure on the leaders like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden as well, and all these other corporate Democrats. You don't have those same economic pressures coming from capitalists, coming from corporate America when it comes to an issue like abortion. But then when it also comes to issues on the economy, I mean, they just basically completely roll over and allow these types of things to be dictated by some of the most corrupt members of their party. And listen, I mean, in terms of like young people showing out to vote, that has been where Democrats over the course of Joe Biden's administration have been taking the most significant hit. It's been among young people. Now, he did the student debt forgiveness, partially at least. That gave him a little bit of a bump. He did the adjustments on weed pardons for people convicted of possession at the federal level. That affected a couple thousand people. That's a little bit of a bump, depending on what he chooses to do in terms of legalizing or decriminalizing or rescheduling marijuana at the federal level. That could potentially give him a bump with young people. But at the end of the day, if young people see a party that is allowing, for example, their climate legislation to be dictated by a single fossil fuel millionaire coal baron named Joe Manchin from West Virginia, or in any piece of legislation, if you're just allowing the most conservative, the most right-wing, the most corrupted members of your party to determine what you're able to do through your legislative agenda, well, then you're effectively just governing as Republican lights, and that's not going to be enough to win you these elections, and it's certainly not going to be enough to give you the coalition that you are describing in this clip that would be necessary to actually follow through on protecting abortion rights. So we could end up with a situation where Republicans take back the House, maybe they even take back the Senate, and then what? Then what's your plan, Nancy Pelosi? Because right now, you do do have those majorities, right? You could make that aggressive push, confront the members of your own party that are blocking the adjustments to the filibuster, call them out publicly, do an aggressive campaign against them, and get them to fall in line to actually go forward with doing this while you still have those slim majorities, and get it done and demonstrate to the American people that you can actually fight for and accomplish these things. But the alternative, in all likelihood, based on the data we have right now, is that that's not going to happen. And the situation where what Nancy Pelosi was just describing there, where you pick up a couple senators, you hold on to the House of Representatives, very unlikely to happen. That's just not going to come to pass. So, I mean, really what she's describing there is that Democrats are just hoping that they get bailed out in the midterms on this abortion issue solely. And when that doesn't happen, they're going to throw their hands up in the air and just say, well, I guess this is just the fault of Republicans. What could have been done? We couldn't have done anything more to possibly try to actually protect abortion rights when we had the power at our disposal to actually fucking do it.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying